Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today I have a very exciting guest for you. Today I interview Mubin. Mubin is the CTO and co-founder of a company called Navi Medical Technologies. Mubin arrived in Australia as an international student to study a Masters of Biomedical Engineering. While Mubin was at university, he was part of a group that co-founded Navi Medical Technologies. We're going to talk about what it's like to found a company and the challenges they face trying to raise funds during a pandemic and the advice that he has for every entrepreneur. So please stay tuned. Like always, if you find this video useful, like, subscribe, leave a comment, and tell me who you want me to interview next. The one thing I'm absolutely dying to get into, tell me a little bit about Navi. What is Navi? How did it start and when did it start? Start with that.
Yes, so Navi Medical Technologies is a pediatric-based medical device company. We're Melbourne-based, basically, but we build devices to improve care for sick children all around the world. That's sort of our motto. Actually, the exact words would be creating brighter and healthier future for children around the world. That's our
Absolutely.
goal. So 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 at Navi, we build medical devices to solve a lot of fit for purpose medical devices to solve a lot of the problems that we find in the children's hospitals and in the women's hospitals. And the problem that we're solving at the moment is actually helping doctors place central venous line in premature babies and older children, so that the drug delivery is quicker and the whole process is efficient. So how did Navi come together? Okay, so this is actually quite
What year
interesting
did it come
because
together?
it came together in
Yeah.
2016, and it came together
Yep.
through a course at the University of Melbourne called Biodesign Innovation. So it actually came through a course itself, and it wasn't like, we sort of I sort of put in a Gumtree ad and found 5 founders through that. It was more like, we met through a course and went through that.
Tell me more about how you all came together. So you came together in the course, and how did Navi start from that?
Yes, so like I said, it was through a course called Biodesign Innovation. Now the purpose of the course, and the course was interestingly introduced in the same year that I did it. The purpose of the course was to bring together a cohort of engineering student, biomedical engineering master student, and a
Yep.
cohort of students that were doing an MBA. So students from School of Engineering, students of from the Melbourne Business School, and pair them with a bunch of clinicians that were really active in the medical device innovation field in Melbourne itself, right? So the purpose of the course was that you would then go out to different hospitals, different clinics, talk to doctors, nurses, patients, and sort of get a list of needs and problems that they're facing
Yep.
in their domain. And this would be either through interviews, through observing them when they were doing their procedures, talking to patients, and all that. And then, you would select one problem that you're really passionate about, or, you think that you really want to work towards, or has a big market, or has a big impact, or, can be worked towards in that time frame. It was a 1 year course. And then you sort of find a solution to that problem and then sort of present a business case. That's why you had MBA. So it was like sort of a mini startup simulation in that course. Now, the great thing that happened through that course was we actually did find a lot of real world problems that needed solving, right? And for personally, I've seen
Yeah.
a lot of problems in Pakistani hospitals, but when I came here, I saw Royal Women's, Royal Melbourne Hospital, and I thought, these are quite advanced hospitals. There wouldn't be a lot of problems here. But when you actually go into the setting itself, you talk to the doctors and you see them, you'll be like, we could easily come up with like 10 to 20 different problems just in one session. And I'm like, we're in 2017 and there's still, sorry, 2016, and there's still a lot of problems that haven't been solved. Um, so the problem that we're solving now as part of the startup actually came through that course, and the team that I met is actually came through that course as well. So it's quite interesting, yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned that because I was doing some research and I was looking at some of the stuff that on your website as well. So let's just look at the problem that you're actually trying to solve now with the neonatal catheters.
Yep.
Um, Tell us a little bit about right now, if you want to put a catheter in a neonatal kid, tell me, is it just an adult catheter that they use right now? And it's not specifically designed for kids themselves?
No, no, no. It's not that. Like they're actually designed for kids. They're
Okay.
very tiny catheters that could go into the vessel. I think
Okay.
what the website might be trying to say is that there are a lot of devices in the market that are only suited for um, adult sort of population and not
Right.
newborns and pediatrics because it's such a small portion of the market, right? So FDA had this survey done, I think in 2021 or 2020, I remember, and they found out that only 10% of all the devices that they approve are for pediatrics, and only 5% of those for newborn. So you can see that the disparity,
Right.
right? Like there's so less of
Right.
the devices, and a lot of the devices that get used in the pediatrics are sort of the ones that were built for adults, and they're sort of trying to fit it on pediatrics until someone comes in and
Yep.
makes it very specific to them. So I
Gotcha.
think that was the message. The catheters that we deal with are not necessarily um, under that sort of problem. And we're not building the catheters as well, right? So the current problem that we're trying to solve is actually placement of the
Hmm.
catheter and actually monitoring as once it's actually placed within the body. So catheters
Absolutely.
are basically so catheters are basically your thin, flexible tubes that are they're basically feeding tubes, right? So for premature babies, they're either inserted through their arms or through their
Absolutely.
umbilical vein, and the purpose of the catheter is to actually place them just below the heart or above the heart if you're coming from the arm, and 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 what it does is basically it creates an opening from outside to inside so that doctors can deliver important drugs and nutrition to keep the baby alive and keep them healthy until they can be out of the ICU, right? Now the issue with this procedure is that it's done blindly.
Absolutely. Now, in terms of the catheters themselves, it says basically on your website, I think it's 40% of them are misplaced when they're inserted, and the second thing is even when they're put in the right place, 50% of them migrate. So prior to your device, how do we actually try and correct that issue right now?
At the moment, so at the moment, the misplacement rate is due to the fact that there is no way of knowing where the catheter tip is in real time. So the basic process is that
Absolutely.
the clinicians will do a calculation of the catheter. They'll look at the patient's body and they'll try to estimate how much the catheter should go in, so sort of estimate the insertion depth, and then they'll place it,
Yeah.
and they'll try to navigate it based on haptic feedback, which is not very reliable. Um, and then what they'll do is they'll call for an X-ray that could take 5 minutes to an hour, depending on the time of the day, if it's for newborn babies. And when it comes in, if it's not in the right spot, then sometimes they actually have to remove the whole kit, and it's not sterile anymore. So they have to bring in a new kit and redo the procedure. So that takes a lot of time and creates a lot of frustration from the clinician. So that's the placement of the catheter, where we talked about misplacement.
Right.
Uh, then you talked about the monitoring aspect of it. So what happens is that once they sort of get it in the right spot in the second and third try, and then they confirm it with the X-ray, what happens is that the catheter can actually migrate to a suboptimal position without you actually knowing that it has
Yep.
migrated. And if it migrates, for example, too high into the heart, it can start delivering drugs to that undesirable location and could cause issues like cardiac tamponade or issues where the heart's outer layer sort of,
Right.
inflates, and it can become really, really dangerous for the baby. There is currently no way for the clinicians to pick that up unless they do an X-ray every day. But then if they do an X-ray every day, then you're bombarding them with ionizing radiations, and X-ray has its own problems. So, so
That's
that there, this is where we come in, basically.
that's exactly what I'm saying. So the problem is that effectively it's hard to we kind of estimate where they get placed, and then secondly, if they move, we really can't determine that it's moved, and it could potentially deliver the drugs to the wrong location of where the intended target is. Now, what are the actual consequences of that happening? Because the solution that you've come up with is actually quite ingenious. And I will ask you to just explain that a bit. But what are the consequences of actually placing the catheter in the wrong position
So
and the drugs are delivered to the wrong location?
yes, so there are a lot of complications that could happen. I think the one that I talked about was cardiac tamponade, where sort of if the drugs are toxic and if
Yep.
they sort of if the line migrates or the tip migrates deep into the heart, it can start pumping the drugs not inside the heart but on the outer layers of the heart, and it could start inflating it. that could be dangerous because
Right.
it could impair the heart's function or anything else. It may even require surgery to fix. Don't quote me on that. I need to confirm that, but it actually can get quite dangerous. The other one could be if it gets too low, it
Yeah,
may start delivering
absolutely.
toxic drugs on in the liver, or some of the portions of the body underneath the heart
Right.
that are not suitable for those kind of toxic drugs. So that's another complication that could come out of it.
From the cost benefit perspective of this device that you guys are effectively developing, just removing those complications could actually be a cost saving to the hospital itself because there's no additional treatment or anything required for the actual the patient itself as a starting point. How did you how did you come up with what the solution was? How does the actual device actually work?
Yes, so it was an interesting process because it just goes back to our biodesign days, right? So the biodesign process it follows something called a double diamond approach. So you start with zero problems, but then you sort of go towards this divergent thinking where you come up with a list of problems, and then you sort of pick one problem and you sort of create the first diamond. So that's your problem. This is where you get your problem statement and the need statement, right? So we got that need statement to that process. But then there's another diamond that I hadn't talked about before, which is basically how do you come up with a solution? Well, you brainstorm a bunch of solution. Again, another sort of stage of divergent thinking. You come up with a bunch of solution and then again use a bit of a criteria to figure out which solution might be the best, and then you sort of converge to one solution. In our case, we came up when we did the brainstorming, the idea was that you start with a bunch of ideas. It can be any idea, it can be a crazy idea, doesn't matter. And then you sort of start filtering them down to something that's achievable. You use a criteria. The criteria could be what would be the regulatory burden or what would be the potential regulatory burden, the technical burden, how accurately would this solve the problem? Are the users going to like the form factor that would come out of that solution? But anyways, in for this particular case, what actually ended up happening was that we found this technique in a lot of research papers that haven't been utilized for newborn babies and older children. It's called a ECG-based duplication technique, where what happens is that there's a way to actually make the catheter a conductive probe, and as the conductive probe moves
Right.
closer to the heart, the signals get stronger. And then if you're able to read those signals, you can use that to, determine the tip location. Now, there was a bunch of research done on it, but not enough for you to know what these signals are exactly for different locations. So what we did then was we did a bunch of studies at the Royal Women's Hospital where we collected a bunch of data, labeled them with X-rays, which is the standard of care. And we sort of then learned, okay, so these are the bunch of ECG waveforms, and these are the bunch of X-rays, and that's how they correlate. We found patterns, and then we went ahead and sort of developed a device that automatically reads those patterns or understands those patterns, so that the next time they get a pattern like that when they're doing a procedure, it would tell you which sort of pattern it matches in terms of the location.
Absolutely. That makes perfect sense. So effectively, if I was to summarize it for the layman's out there, people like me, for example, you found some research that you could effectively use an ECG to determine the location of where the tip is, but the feedback effectively you got, it doesn't necessarily give you the information you need to know where the location is. So you just went through an iterative process where you got a heap of data through the women's hospital, and you were able to use that information to actually paint a picture of where the actual location of where that tip is. And how long did that process take to actually go through the data and do those studies and everything like that? Because we're talking, you started in 2016, you've ideated, you've come up with a problem. How long then to actually come to to get just to get the data sets?
Well, clinical studies in general takes a lot of time.
Yep,
That's like one of the challenges of the medical device industry because you got to go through a bunch of approvals, and they're not just, technical approvals. They're also ethics approvals. They're also research approvals.
absolutely.
And then you have to sort of set up an agreement with the hospitals that you're working with. So there's a bunch of things you have to do, bunch of logistics, and each approval has its own timeline, right? And it can vary a lot. But I think we did about two studies at the Women's Hospital, both for different purposes, both with different equipment. But the end goal was to actually collect that data. And I think we recruited about 130 participants, and it took us about So we did the first one in 2018. So and the second one was finished in 2022. So about 4 years.
Right, and that's during a pandemic as well.
Yeah, the pandemic
How
sort of
did that?
delayed it
Yeah, I was gonna.
massively.
How did that complicate it?
It delayed it massively, and we're doing a third study
Absolutely.
at the moment. And we got approvals last year, but there were a few other approvals that had to follow through, and they took some time. So we just started recruiting for that, and our wonderful chief medical officer has been at it since yesterday to recruit more and more patients. But it's a recent study that's going on at the women's hospital as well.
That's great news. And so you effectively conducted a couple of years of studies to just to collect the data that you need to be able to actually work out what that picture looks like. And you've had to do it during a pandemic out of all these processes as well. Um, do you have a bit of an insight about like this stuff isn't cheap, and this is what I know about startups. They always need cash. In terms of being able to raise money, how was that able to be done? I know you won a few grants along the way. So you won a Victorian grant and effectively a federal government grant as well. But what was that process? What was that like in the actual incubator itself? Like, you're stuck in that incubator, trying to raise money while you're actually kind of trying to be, I describe it as you're building the plane as you're trying to fly it.
Yeah, it is exactly like that. It's that classic chicken and egg problem, you know.
Yeah.
You need the money to do research, but then you need the research to do the to get the money.
Yeah,
It was
correct.
yeah. So what ends up happening generally with startups is that it's like a step-by-step approach. So initially, when you have no funds, or you have some funds that you put from your own pocket, or you use your friends and family to get those funds, you get those funds and you sort of try to achieve some work through that. So it may be an early proof of concept, maybe a quick animal study, maybe a benchtop study. You can quickly create a business plan and you use that to sort of get certain milestones done, and then you start going to the investor and say, this is the work that I've done. You go to the pitch competitions and say, this is the work that I've done, and that sort of, if you're successful in that, that sort of gives you a nice boost, and then you get to that step phase again, because now you have the money and now you have to spend it, and get the next set of milestones done so that you can go one step up and raise more money. As you're going up, um, you're you're giving away more equity, but at the same time, the value of your company is going up as well, because you're doing
Absolutely.
more and more, work towards
Hmm.
the company. So you may start with a benchtop study, but then you go up to an animal study, then you do a clinical study, and as you can see that the value of your company is going up because you have done so much to show that this is a valuable problem to be solved, and it's a viable solution and all that. At the same time, the risk profile sort of starts going down. So at the start, your
Absolutely.
company is very risky. No one would want to invest until, unless, it's you or, some of your friends who believe in you. But then as soon as, you start achieving those milestones, you go one step down, and, the risk from the company gets taken out, and so on and so forth, for further rounds. Now, it has been
That,
quite
that
hard raising funds. And our CEO has done an excellent job in raising a lot of funds, and the team and our COO with the grants and everything. But I think the point I was going to make was that there have been some accelerator programs that we have joined in Australia and overseas that have
yep.
actually accelerated that pathway for us by providing us with the right networks, access to the right people, access to the right expertise, and then that has massively helped us to move that journey and grow it quicker.
That's the key point. So when you're first starting off, it's super high risk, kind of just to get to that first milestone. But when you do put in the hard work and the effort, and you go through a pandemic, and nothing's guaranteed. This is the other thing too. Nothing's guaranteed. You get over that first hurdle, and then sort of a bigger door opens up, if that makes sense. And then that gives you a little bit more opportunity to get to the next stage. So you sort of iterate and go through that process. Now, were there any big hurdles that you faced during that process as well?
Um, there were a lot of hurdles, so I could say
Minus
that,
the pandemic.
yeah, I mean every domain in the company has its own hurdle, right? So, um, for example, the clinical had its own hurdle. I talked about the clinical challenges. It takes a very long time to set up studies and recruit patients. clinical had that hurdle. The hurdles that product had was around, getting the right accuracy, getting the right parts sorted, and all that. Um, I think the biggest hurdle at the moment that we're facing with fundraising, and I'm not talking about grants, but in general, that because the inflation is so high, people have become more risk averse, and no one is really putting the money
Absolutely.
out there. They're calling it the winter. And if you've seen Game of Thrones, you know what I mean. I think in the last 2 years, they have been saying that winter is coming, and now the winter has come.
Yeah,
It's cold, plus at the same time, people aren't really putting any money. So, like I
absolutely.
said, every domain has its own challenges. The regulatory domain had its own challenge. You got to figure out what the regulators want, and then you try to work towards that. Luckily, because we're talking to the FDA in the US, FDA has been super helpful in sort of helping us figure out that regulatory pathway. They have this um, pathway called pre-submission meeting where you have the opportunity to actually talk to them and get their thoughts on things. So that has been super helpful. But like I said, every domain has its own challenge, and we're trying to navigate through that.
Absolutely. And especially in the current market right now, I know I work for a startup myself. Um, it's hard to raise hard to raise capital. They all need capital. It's hard to raise capital because effectively it's really hard for people to spend money now in a market where they see sort of the stock market's kind of going like this, and it's all sentiment. So as one thing goes, then everyone sort of pulls back their investment, and it's really hard, and it's a challenge. So just for anyone out there who wants to start a business to become a multi-billionaire overnight, it's really not like that. There is a lot of challenges, and Mubin, you're a classic example of that startup where you've got something and it's slowly growing, it's growing, but then now you're coming into that, that investment winter. And this is where you've got to really tighten everything down. You've got to get your product value. You've got to get everything right to be able to raise that next bit of capital to get that next development done. Now, tell me a little bit about one of the great things that happened. What happened to this breakthrough designation with the product with the FDA?
Yeah,
When did that
yes.
happen?
It was quite recent. I think it was a few months ago. So breakthrough device designation is sort of FDA's way of saying that whatever you're doing, we want it in the market soon, right? And we're going to
Perfect.
throw every resource at it to help you as much as you can. So remember I talked about the pre-submission pathway before?
Yep.
So the pre-submission pathway actually typically takes about 3 to 4 months for you to actually get in touch with FDA and get their feedback. But with the breakthrough device designation, that sort of gets accelerated, and you have more opportunities to talk to FDA at more points. So that's super helpful. Um, yeah, it's. I mean, it's. I think that the reason that we were able to get breakthrough device designation is that FDA recognized that the problem that we're trying to solve is sort of, urgent, and there's a need for this kind of device, especially because it's catering to the newborn and the pediatric population. So FDA is very supportive of innovations that are coming in the pediatric space and the newborn space, to the point that they have actually waived their fee if there's a pediatric or newborn or neonatal submission. So and personal experience with FD has been that they're very open to um, different things. Like they have their regulatory laws and principles, but when you try to explain them, they're more receptive because they want to support innovation in this area. But yeah, that's breakthrough for us at the moment.
We'll wrap up this meeting pretty soon because it's already over the 1 hour mark. But what's next? What happens next? So you've got that breakthrough designation. I believe you get allocated your own account manager, kind of. You get a accelerated pathway to actual approval as well. What's next?
I guess from a regulatory point of view, what's next is basically us setting up some meetings with FDA and getting feedback on different things. And that's where the breakthrough is going to be super helpful because the window of feedback will be less. But from a company point of view in general, we're in a very in what you would call a crunch period. When I say crunch, it's
Yeah.
everything is happening at the same time. So we have multiple studies up and running, or either up and running or in the approval phase at the women's hospital, at the children's hospital, and we're trying to collect as much as data as we can and trying to prove that the device works as well. We have recently, or we're about to finish the next iteration of the product, which we're calling the alpha prototype, and it will be ready to be tested in one of the studies that I talked about. Um, in that study, we just want to make sure that it works as good as we claim it to be. Um, Once it does
Yep.
that, we'll use those learnings and create the final sort of prototype and do what we call a validation or a pivotal study. The pivotal or validation study is a study where you collect data specifically for regulatory bodies. So we want to collect, like we want to do a really good study design. We want to follow all the GCP principles. It's not that we're not following them now, but the reporting requirements becomes a lot more rigorous. So we want to do that, and submit that data to the FDA hopefully next year or the
Yep.
year after, and use that as a way to get a regulatory approval.
That's exceptional, and that's some great. That's actually a great process that you're in right now. I know it's crunch time, and it's really really hard where everything's happening at the same time. But it almost feels like you're almost towards that end of that next phase to be able to do that next study. So that's some great news. Now, I'll lead off on this final note as well. What happens next once you do get FDA approval? Does it become easier to get approval in other countries as well? So like Australia, Singapore, the UK, everything like that, or do they again all have their own separate, different processes that you need to go through as well?
Yeah, depends. So Australia, for example, recognizes FDA approval, but you need to do other things alongside it. So there's a pathway
Right.
called MDSAP pathway, where you
Yep.
need to have a medical device ISO certified. It's called ISO 13485 certified system in your company, and the MDSAP pathway sort of assesses that. So you get the FDA approval, and then you get the MDSAP certified certificate, and then you can come to Australia and get an approval. For New Zealand, for example, you can get an FDA approval and then you can get an approval directly. So it really depends on where you're going. But I think for us, the primary market is the US. Once we have
Yep.
gotten a regulatory approval, we do want to do a sort of a controlled release and distribute it to some of the hospitals that are friendly to us and have them try it before we start to distribute it widely. Um, but yeah, that's the main the primary market for
Perfect,
us.
perfect, and that's a great story. Like you've got a goal. You see it. There's a light at the end of that tunnel, and I know it's crunch time, and it's coming down fast. I do want to be respectful of your time. We have gone over the hour mark. Mubin, I'd like to thank you for coming on the podcast. You are my fourth guest. You've got an incredible story. You've gone through a path of resilience, and then you've started your own startup. So I would say you jumped out of the pot, you jumped into the fire, and you guys have done really well. And I've been following you guys on LinkedIn. Now, just a couple of things. I will send you an email for all your LinkedIn and everything. How do people help you out? How do they get in contact with what you guys are doing? How do they support what you're doing? What's the best way for people to support what you're doing?
There is a contact us page on our website. So our website is
Yep.
navitechnologies.com. People can
Yep.
use that contact us form to contact us, or you can just use info@navitechnologies.com as a way to send us an email if you want. We're always looking for, well, I wouldn't say funds at this stage, but we're always looking for any sort of support. If you know anyone in sort of the neonatal domain or the pediatric domain that might be interested in a device like this, please tell them about us. Or if you are one of
Absolutely.
those person, please reach out to us. Yeah.
And if you're in those industries, if you check out the link below this video, I'm going to have all the links to getting contact with everybody at Navi. So all the links will be there. Are you on any social media, Twitter, Facebook, anything like that? Apart from LinkedIn, I'll have your LinkedIn page on there as well.
So Navi, I think we just use LinkedIn as a primary social media.
Perfect. Okay, so I'll have all the links below this video so everyone can get access to that. Mubin, thank you so much for your time. Before everyone leaves, I do ask them one thing. Do you have any parting comments, or is there any sort of information that you think that we didn't cover off, and it's something you'd like to express before we sort of wrap up this interview?
Hmm. I think you've covered pretty much everything, but if I were to give a parting advice, is that,
Yeah.
well,
What is it?
I think if you're trying to start a company in Australia, especially in Victoria, there's a lot of support out there. So
Yep.
if you have doubts going in your head around fundraising and other stuff, I would say that the government is really, really trying to beef up, at least especially the medical device sector. So I would say that,
Yep.
don't get scared by all the scary stuff out there which I talked about. Give it a try. There's a lot of programs out there that are helping startups grow. like I said, there are a lot of accelerator and incubator programs that have helped us, and they can help other companies as well. And look, if you need any advice or help from us, we're always available. I think, Taraka, you will share the links. Send me an email if you need any help.
Absolutely.
But yeah, don't be scared. I mean, at this stage, that's the only thing I could think of from the top of my head.
Naveen, that's some great advice, and you've done great things in Australia, and what you guys are doing at Navi is incredible. And at the end of the day, it's going to save lives. It's gonna it's going to save lives in less treatments for people through complications, and just better access to better medical care for everyone. So thank you for everything you've done. Thank you so much for your time. I'll be following everything you guys are doing. And once you do get that FDA approval, I might have you back on just to walk us through that.
Yep, sounds good. Happy to help.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mubin, and you have a great day.
You too.
Okay, guys, so I hope you got a lot of value out of that interview. Now, if you've got a job interview coming up, or you're preparing for a job interview process, check out the link below. It's my free course on how to prepare for any job interviews. We go through the key things that knock people out all the time: fashion and hygiene. What are the common questions you're likely to be asked? What questions do you need to prepare for? And critically, what do you do if you've started applying for jobs and you've got missed calls from recruiters? Now, those are screening calls, and you have to pass those in order to get through the next stage. So if you want access to all of that, please check out the link below. Like always, best of luck with your career.